March 1956. Over 20,000 people packed themselves into the Palais de Chaillot in Paris, 2 days before the Geneva Motor Show even opened. No fashion event or political gathering drew that crowd. They came for a car. Renault's new Dauphine, named after the French crown princess herself. The French press went wild for it. Within a few years, American magazines were calling it the car that has come up fastest in the US market. By 1960, it was shifting over 102,000 units annually in America, second only to the Volkswagen Beetle among imports. Yet just across the English Channel, British motorists looked at this pretty French sedan and quietly chose something else. They chose the Morris Minor, a car designed by Alec Issigonis back in 1948, with its upright stance and decidedly unfashionable profile. The Morris cost around £695 by the late 1950s, for a basic two-door model hardly cheap for a small car. The Dauphine, despite being an import, could often be found at similar or even slightly lower prices in Britain. So, what was going on? Why would sensible British buyers pass over this chic continental offering? The answer tells us everything about what really mattered in the 1950s motorcar market. It wasn't about looks or marketing slogans. It was about something far more fundamental. And if you've ever cursed at a car that left you stranded or spent a weekend with a wire brush tackling rust, you already know where this story is heading. Britain, in 1956, was a nation still recovering from the war, still under rationing until just 4 years earlier. Steel was precious, quality mattered, and memories were long. This is the story of two cars that pioneered the European economy car movement, and why one of them became a beloved British icon while the other became a cautionary tale despite selling over 2 million units worldwide. Section 1. The French Princess arrives. When Renault's engineers unveiled the Dauphine in March 1956, they had every reason to be confident. The car represented a massive leap forward from its predecessor, the 4CV. The wheelbase stretched to 89 inches, 6.3 inches longer than the 4CV. The engine grew from 760 cubic centimeters to 845 cubic centimeters, and power increased from 19 horsepower to 32 horsepower in standard trim. The Dauphine featured genuinely modern design elements for its time. It had an automatic choke remarkable for a small economy car. The steering column incorporated a lock for the ignition and starter, years before this became common practice. From 1961 onward, it included child-proof door locks. The Gordini and Export models from 1964 even boasted all-disc brakes, which was cutting-edge technology for a car in this class. Renault built the Dauphine at their highly automated factory in Flins, which by the late 1950s was producing over 200,000 examples annually. The factory was so efficient that at peak production, a completed car rolled off the assembly line every 20 to 30 seconds. This was modern mass production at its finest. The car looked the part too. Unlike the staid, upright design still common in Britain, the Dauphine had curves. Its three-box sedan styling, penned with assistance from Luigi Segre of Carrozzeria Ghia, looked contemporary and continental. French film stars like Brigitte Bardot were photographed with Dauphin, cementing its image as the fashionable choice. In Paris and other French cities, these cheerful little sedans quickly became ubiquitous. The engineering followed the rear-engine philosophy championed by Volkswagen and Fiat. Renault's Fernand Picard noted in a 1957 paper that rear-wheel drive configurations had grown from just 2.6% of continental Western Europe's car production in 1946 to 26.6% by 1956. The Dauphine rode this wave of technical thinking. But here's where the story gets interesting. The Dauphine weighed approximately 650 kilograms, about 1,433 pounds. That's exceptionally light. The body panels measured just 22 to 23 gauge steel on non-structural areas. That thinness was both the car's greatest advantage and its fatal flaw. Section 2. The minor that became major. While Renault basked in Parisian glory, the Morris Minor was already 8 years into its production run. Designed in the mid-1940s by a young engineer named Alec Isagonis, the same man who would later create the Mini, the Minor, debuted at the October 1948 London Motor Show, sporting revolutionary engineering for its time. The Minor featured unit construction, rack and pinion steering, and torsion bar front suspension. It achieved a lower center of gravity through the use of small 14-inch wheels. The design was years ahead of the pre-war engineering found in most European economy cars of that era. Early models struggled slightly with an underpowered flathead engine, but that changed dramatically in 1956. The Morris Minor 1000, as it was rebranded, received a 948 cubic centimeter BMC A-series overhead valve engine, producing 37 brake horsepower at 4,750 revolutions per minute. This new engine transformed the car's character. Top speed jumped from 63 miles per hour to 75 miles per hour. The 0 to 60 acceleration time dropped from 52.5 seconds to 31.3 seconds. Along with the new engine came other significant updates. Morris fitted a substantially revised gearbox, a large wraparound rear windscreen, and a one-piece curved front windscreen that markedly improved visibility. The car looked more modern without losing its essential character. By 1957, you could buy a Morris Minor 2-door for £602.17. A 4-door cost £638.17. The popular Traveller estate, with its distinctive wood framing, ran £683.17. Yes, these prices included Britain's substantial purchase tax, often around 1/3 of the total price, but they represented what real people actually paid. The Morris offered something the Dauphine struggled to match: a sense of solidity. The Minor's body panels used heavier gauge steel. The engineering felt robust rather than delicate. And crucially, it came with an established dealer network across Britain and strong parts availability. Morris, by then part of the British Motor Corporation, could leverage economies of scale across multiple models, sharing the A-series engine, including the Austin A35 and the Austin Healey Sprite. Section 3. The Great Rust Catastrophe. Here's where we need to talk about something that haunted the Dauphine throughout its existence. According to Road and Track's testing, the Dauphine's 0 to 60 acceleration time measured approximately 32 seconds. That's actually quite similar to the Morris Minor's 31.3 seconds. Top speeds were comparable too, around 70 to 75 miles per hour for both cars. So, performance wasn't dramatically different, despite the Morris having 5 additional horsepower. No, the real problem was rust. The Dauphine's lightweight construction, achieved through exceptionally thin body panels, made it vulnerable to corrosion in a way that shocked even period motorists accustomed to rusty cars. British buyers who dealt with damp weather and salted winter roads discovered this weakness quickly. The thin 22 to 23 gauge steel used on non-structural panels simply couldn't withstand the British climate. But it gets worse. Models built between 1959 and 1963 suffered from particularly poor quality steel, even more rot-prone than the already thin panels used in other years. This batch of cars rusted at an alarming rate. According to Classic and Sports Car magazine's Buyer's Guide, Dauphine survival numbers remain low, specifically because rust exterminated so many examples. Time magazine, in a 2007 retrospective by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Dan Neal, named the Dauphine one of the 50 worst cars of all time, noting that it could actually be heard rusting. This wasn't hyperbole. Owners reported discovering rust holes within months of purchase. Floor panels rusted through, structural members corroded. The pretty French princess was rotting from the inside out. Stuart Kitchen, a British Dauphine owner quoted in Classic and Sports Car, recalled, "When I was 18, my father bought a Dauphine. It was the sexiest thing on wheels at the time, but he sold it after 18 months because my mother couldn't cope with the non-synchro first gear and it had already started rusting." 18 months. That's all it took for visible rust to become a problem on a car that should have lasted years. The Morris Minor, by contrast, used more substantial steel throughout its construction. Yes, minors could rust. All cars of that era did eventually, but they rusted at a normal, manageable pace. You could catch it early and repair it. With the Dauphine, rust seemed to appear overnight and spread like wildfire. Section 4. The devil in the details. Beyond the rust, the Dauphine revealed other problems that British motorists found less tolerable than their continental counterparts. The standard transmission through 1962 was a 3-speed manual with non-synchronized first gear. This meant drivers needed to either come to a complete stop before selecting first or master the art of double declutching. For experienced drivers, this was merely annoying. For new motorists or those accustomed to more modern transmissions, it was a deal-breaker. The rear engine layout created its own challenges. The Dauphine used a swing-axle rear suspension, which could produce unpredictable oversteer characteristics if tire pressures weren't maintained precisely according to Renault's unusual specifications. The factory recommended notably higher pressure in the rear tires than the front to combat the car's natural tendency toward tail happiness. But owners and mechanics often inadvertently reintroduced dangerous oversteer by overinflating the front tires or letting rear pressures drop. In 1960, Renault attempted to address this with a revised suspension system they marketed as aero-stable. This added extra rubber springs up front and auxiliary air spring units at the rear, giving the rear wheels a small degree of negative camber. It helped, but the fundamental handling quirks remained. American drivers experienced similar issues with the Chevrolet Corvair, which shared the rear engine swing-axle layout. The engine itself, while water-cooled unlike the Volkswagen Beetle's air-cooled design, had its own peculiarities. The 845 cubic centimeter inline, 4 used wet liners, and a camshaft driven by 3 gears, the middle one made of fiber to reduce noise. When that fiber gear wore, the gear train became distinctly noisy. The engine was known for developing cracks in the block about 3 inches above the sump on the left side. Oil leaks were common. The Morris Minor avoided these exotic complications. Its A-series engine was conventional, reliable, and familiar to British mechanics everywhere. The front engine, rear-wheel drive layout offered predictable handling. The 4-speed gearbox, well, the 3-speed, was gone by 1956, provided synchromesh on all forward gears except first, and even first gear was synchronized on later models. Section 5. The numbers don't lie. Let's look at what actually happened in the marketplace. Over its production run from March 1956 through December 1967, Renault built over 2 million Dauphines. That's a genuinely impressive figure. The car sold well in France, Italy, Spain, Argentina, Brazil, and for a brief period, the United States. In 1960, American sales peaked at 102,000 units, compared to around 130,000 Volkswagen Beetles. But then the wheels came off, sometimes literally, given the rust situation. By 1966, U.S. sales had collapsed to just 12,106 units. Renault themselves admitted in advertising for the Dauphine's successor that our earlier cars were not fully prepared to meet the demands of America. More than a fair share of things went wrong with our cars. Less than a fair share of our dealers were equipped to deal with what went wrong. That's a stunning admission from a major manufacturer. They essentially confessed their product was inadequately developed and their dealer network incompetent. Meanwhile, the Morris Minor reached a milestone that no French import could touch. In 1961, it became the first British car to exceed 1 million units produced. By the time production finally ended in late 1970 and early 1971, traveler and commercial versions continued longest, over 1,600,000 miners had been built, with some sources claiming 1,619,857 total sales. In Britain specifically, the miner remained a common sight on roads throughout the 1960s and well into the 1970s. The Dauphine, despite being one of the first imported cars to sell in large numbers in the UK market, according to multiple sources, never achieved anywhere near the miner's penetration or longevity. The price differential wasn't the determining factor. By the late 1950s, both cars cost roughly similar amounts, around £600 to £700, depending on trim level and body style. British buyers were willing to pay the price. What they weren't willing to accept was the compromised reliability, mysterious rust appearance, and handling quirks that came with the Dauphine package. Section 6. Cultural differences and engineering philosophy. There's a broader story here about competing engineering philosophies. The Dauphine represented a very French approach to automotive design. Make it as light as possible to maximize performance from a small engine, add fashionable styling, include some clever features, and accept certain compromises in durability. This worked well in Mediterranean climates and on French roads, where the lightweight construction meant nimble handling and decent performance despite minimal power. The Morris Minor embodied British engineering conservatism in the best sense. Make it robust, use proven technology, prioritize reliability over cleverness. Accept a slightly higher weight if it means better durability. This philosophy suited British conditions, damp weather, salted roads, and buyers who expected their cars to last. Neither approach was inherently wrong. They simply prioritized different values. But in the British market, facing British weather and British buyer expectations, the conservative approach won decisively. The Dauphine did score some notable victories. Competition-tuned versions won the 1957 Tulip Rally, the 1958 Monte Carlo Rally, and the 1959 Alpine Rally, making it the first car ever to win outright the three most important rallies of that era. Dauphines finished 2, 3, 4 in the GT class of the 1956 Mille Miglia. These were genuine achievements. But rally success didn't translate to real-world durability. The highly tuned Gordini versions and the limited edition rally cars bore little resemblance to the standard Dauphins suffering through British winters. Those racing successes made great marketing material in France. In Britain, word of mouth about rust-riddled bodies mattered more. So there you have it, the Renault Dauphine and the Morris Minor, two pioneers of the European economy car movement, launched the same year, similarly priced, offering comparable performance. Yet one became a beloved British icon that remained in production until 1971 and sold over 1,600,000 units, while the other's reputation was destroyed by rust, reliability issues, and peculiar handling characteristics despite global sales exceeding 2 million units. The lesson here isn't that French engineering was bad or British engineering was good. The lesson is that engineering always involves trade-offs, and those trade-offs need to match your market. Renault chose lightweight construction to maximize performance, a perfectly logical decision that worked well in many markets. But in Britain's damp climate with salted roads and conservative buyers who valued reliability above fashion, those choices proved catastrophic. For those of us who lived through that era, who remember seeing Dauphines on British roads, this story resonates. We watched those pretty French cars disappear from the streets, while miners soldiered on for decades. We knew people who bought Dauphines and regretted it. We also knew Morris owners who kept their cars running for 20, 30, even 40 years. Today, a good Dauphine in Britain fetches £2,500 to £12,500, with verified Gordini and rare rally models commanding much more in France. A comparable Morris Minor costs £5,000 to £20,000, depending on variant and condition. The Morris commands higher values despite being far more common because people remember what worked. What's your experience with these cars? Did you or your family own either one? Drop a comment below and share your stories. We'd love to hear from people who actually lived with these machines. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We'll be covering more classic car comparisons in future episodes, always with the same commitment to real facts and honest history. Thank you for watching. Until next time, keep those classic cars on the road, even if that means spending a bit more time with the rust converter and wire brush.